I suppose, I mean, in a sense, we don't have to talk about that because clearly you're all interested in birds. That's why you've applied to come over here. But I think it's useful to remind ourselves, why most of us, the resource people, other people in this room, are studying in some sense ornithology. That's not the only thing that we do. We study other taxa as well. But birds are particularly interesting, I think. I shouldn't say that. Insects are also interesting, and fish are interesting, and everything's interesting. But let's put it this way. So one is that birds are everywhere. As a vertebrate class, they're amazing. They're everywhere. They're from the frozen wastes of the Antarctic, the penguins and so on, to the middle of deserts, and we've got desert adapted, hot adapted, cold adapted birds. The birds are adapted to live at very high altitudes. Barred geese fly at 8,000 meters when they migrate, and they have special adaptations for this. So birds are everywhere. They're also very diverse. You've got the tiny bee hummingbird that's big, that big, and you've got your ostrich, which is this tall. Not to speak of the extinct birds, which are even some of them are even larger than that. So they're diverse in size. They're diverse in all kinds of life history and behavior. There are flightless birds, and very interesting to see where flightlessness has evolved versus birds that have flight. They all have feathers, of course, all lay eggs, but they're so varied in their breeding strategies. They're monogamous species, they're polyandrous species that you might know, one female and multiple males. There are brood parasites which actually don't build their own nests and take care of their own young but lay their eggs in other birds. So there are a variety of breeding strategies, and obviously the things that are most conspicuous to us are the colors. And I don't have a slide. You can picture in your mind, you will have seen this mosaic of photos of birds. Some are black and white, some are dull. Bird watchers have this term, little brown job. You have this little bird in the bushes and you have no idea what it is. It's called a LBJ, little brown job. Sometimes when bird watchers, they ask, what's that bird? And then you call it a GOK, which is God only knows. So you have the really dull birds, and then you have the extremely bright and showy birds, the birds of paradise. And sometimes it's not the plumage that's showy, but sometimes it's what they do with showy, which is like the bowerbirds, where the males come and pick up, colored bits and pieces of glass and bottle caps and flowers and things like that and decorate their boughs. And of course, the other very conspicuous aspect of birds is their vocalization, their sounds. And there are a few birds, of course, that don't make vocalizations, but a large number of species do. And this is fascinating for a variety of reasons. How do they know how to make those sounds? Do they learn them, or is it just innate? And there's lots of research done on that. Why do they make such complex some of them make very complex vocalizations? Is it to defend territories, to attract mates? And there's lots of research on that. And of course, because birds are everywhere, they're diverse, they're conspicuous. Unlike spiders, for example, you have to go hunting for spiders, but birds are around us. They're conspicuous, they're loud, they're showy. For that reason, I think in our cultures, in various cultures around the world, birds have a very prominent role in song or in stories and folklore, in myths, in legends. And you can think of lots of such examples, I'm sure. So whatever we do really is a human endeavor, and birds, I think, have a special place in our heart, or used to have a special place in our heart. Now I suppose we're all most of us are in cities, and the birds that we see are pigeons and crows, and so we don't tend to see so much of that diversity. But even one generation or two generations ago, there used to be a lot more. So I think it's useful to also appreciate and understand the connection that birds or other wildlife, other biodiversity has with human culture and human imagination. And the reason I say imagination is that a lot of our sayings or idioms or have to do with wild animals. There are moral stories that have to where we imbue animals with some ethical and moral framework. So we draw inspiration as humanity, as individuals, and as collectively we draw inspiration from the natural world and birds as well, in art and poetry and so on. So that's the human side. The other, of course, is that a lot of people argue that birds can also be very convenient indicators of the larger natural world, of ecosystem health and so on. And of course that is sometimes true and sometimes not true. It's not necessarily always true that if the diversity of the community of birds is healthy, whatever that means, it means that other aspects of biodiversity also are doing well. There's sometimes a match, there's sometimes not such a clear match. But what's certainly true is that if we were to choose a taxon that was relatively easy to measure, to be able to understand changes in populations or communities or ecosystems, then birds are quite high up there. Birds are relatively easy because they're conspicuous, they sing and so on. They're easy to measure. And this has a consequence beyond the formal academic or scientific research. This has a consequence in how we are able to involve other people in this. So because large numbers of people across the world love birds, love to watch birds, actually there's a long history of ornithologists working with bird watchers, working with other people who are interested in birds, not from a professional point of view, they don't get their earnings and their bread and butter from this, but from enjoyment. And because there are so many bird watchers, and because bird watchers like to write things down and so on, very fruitful collaborations have been forged between the professional scientists, the ornithologists, and bird watchers on the other hand. And this is happening in India as well, certainly over the last few years. So there are, really nice reasons why we can do this, why birds are very useful for this, the sorts of things that I have listed. I want to just quickly also say that birds have, right from the beginning of studies of ecology or the beginning of natural history, birds have served as models for understanding more about the natural world. Famously, Darwin, of course, when he came up with this idea of evolution by natural selection, the example that's often told to us is some insights he got from looking at the diversity of the finches on the Galapagos Islands. In different islands, different finches, all related, but all different structurally and behaviorally. And this and other examples led into this idea of evolution by natural selection, the natural selection being the mechanism driving evolution. And before that and since then, birds have been used as model systems to study a wide variety of things. Birds have been used to understand the trade-offs. We'll talk about many of these things in a little more detail. The trade-offs between current and future reproduction. If I put all my energies into reproducing now, then I'm unlikely to have the energy or the lifespan to reproduce later. And how do animals resolve this trade-off? Or about allometric relationships, which is what's the relationship between body size and other important life history variables like territory size and home range and food intake and all those sorts of things. So in behavior and evolution, speciation, birds have been used as model systems in a lot of principles, concepts in evolution, ecology, and behavior. Birds, because they're convenient study subjects, are really good model systems and have sometimes sort of initiated, even the studies on birds have initiated entire research themes into the sorts of things that we're going to talk about over the next couple of days. So there's all the other stuff about diversity and so on, but also I should say, just to remember that a lot of the theory, when you read the theory of whether it's natural selection or in behavioral ecology of sexual selection or mate choice, lots of these things have, if not been initiated by studies on birds, they've been supported very heavily by studies on birds. And in India, just to wrap up, in India, of course, nothing, I shouldn't imply that just because we are from India, we should only study and do research on birds in India. Obviously, that doesn't apply to other scientists in other parts of the world who don't take their national boundaries as their limit, so we shouldn't do that either. But it is true that in our backyard, which is in our country, we have an impressive diversity of species. There are 1,300 plus species of birds. They live in an impressive diversity of habitats, from pelagic birds and really dry land, Western Ghats, Himalayan, high Himalayas, mid and foot Himalayas. And what that means is they're living under different climatic and habitat conditions. It means that they also will be adapted in different ways in their physiology, in their behavior, in their morphology. So, we have monogamous species, we have polygamous species, we have polyandrous species in the country. We have a large diversity to work with, and hence we really need many more eyes and ears and intelligent, clever people on the ground working on these birds, by which I mean all of you. And of course, last but not least, across the world and in India, birds, like other parts of biodiversity, face a large number of conservation problems. And there are the famous endangered species. Great Indian bustard is in the news right now. And of course, species like those deserve a lot of attention. But I should say that of the vast, all the other species that we don't tend to think about very much, it looks from some analysis we've been doing that a large fraction of those are also in considerable danger, that they've been declining over the last 20-25 years, but they're not in the spotlight. And they're not in the spotlight for two reasons. One is that people just think, oh, these are relatively abundant birds, and we don't have to worry. We have to worry about the ones, for which there's only 100 individuals or 200 individuals left. But that's not the time to start worrying. That's almost too late, or it might be too late in many species. We need to start worrying, and we need to start understanding reasons and taking action when what used to be abundant species, when we see indications of decline. That's the point at which we have to understand and intervene, rather than wait until it's almost too late or perhaps too late. So a large fraction of our so-called common birds seem to be declining. And this the statement I'm making, it's not published, but the statement I'm making is based on analyses that have been done using data collected by bird watchers, by citizen scientists. So now that kind of information is available. So conservation problems, don't imagine that they are restricted to the handful of high-profile species that we hear about. Conservation problems are many species, perhaps the majority of species face problems that we need to try addressing right now. So there's another role over here. There's the basic, what we might call basic ecology, behavior and evolution. That's very important and interesting to study. And then there's the so-called applied part of it, which is about, okay, now we understand these birds, these species. What are we going to make? What are we going to do? What do we have to do to try and ensure that they persist over generations and generations, so that our children and grandchildren, great-grandchildren can continue to enjoy and be inspired by the diversity of species that we have. So what is our role as scientists and as conservationists to play in ensuring that happens? So there's this wide variety of kinds of research, kinds of conservation, wide variety of questions, wide variety of action. It's all available out there, and it's just waiting for each of you to sort of grab the opportunity and run with it. And this course is designed so that you feel prepared and able to begin to start grabbing those opportunities, that you don't feel constrained because you haven't made a start, you haven't had the background, you haven't had a little bit of training. So it's just a little step up to help you along that route. So I hope that you'll find it useful. The disclaimer is this is the first time we're running something like this. It's the first time we're doing something with such a large set of young people like you. As you know, ideally, courses like this are run in small groups, 10, 20 people, and we can have much more interaction, meaningful interaction. The problem with small groups is that they exclude a large number of people who would otherwise like to be there and benefit from being there. So this time we decided to resolve the trade-off in the other direction and to say we'd rather allow many more people to come, even though we know that it kind of dilutes a bit the quality of the interaction. But we hope that's okay. We'll have other sessions, other workshops where it's on the other direction, where there's smaller groups.